Today's video, we're talking about Mel Kiper Jr.'s grades for the Detroit Lions. What is the media saying about the Lions draft? All the picks, giving what the needs were going into this draft. What do they think? Also, I want to talk about a little bit about the Jameson Williams trade rumor that occurred before the NFL draft. We need to talk about it, about accountability in that subject. Let's get it started right now. All right, as you know, the draft is over, and we do like to kind of see what the big-time media thinks about the Detroit Lions draft. Obviously, we're a little bit biased. We're Lions fans, so what do the individuals who are not Lions fans think about the Lions draft? Well, everyone wants to know what Mel Kiper Jr. thinks. He is the draft guy for ESPN. Everybody listens to him, even though he can be wrong. He is a big figure out there. So this is what he said. He says, I had the Lions taking an edge rusher in round one in all four of the mock drafts I mentioned. Twice it was James Pierce, then it was Elijah Adojo, and finally it was Donovan Ezekiel. Part of is because of the value. There's really a solid pass rushers in late round one, and Detroit was poised to make it a first pick. Part of that is because of the severe need at the roster. Aiden Hutchinson led the Lions in sacks last season, racking up 7.5, doing that in 5 games. And then he broke his leg in the mid-October in pass rush and struggled the rest of the season. No other player had more than Zadarius Smith's 4 sacks. Elijah and Ezekiel were both on the board at 28 as Mike Green, yet Detroit looked elsewhere, taking defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. He can fire in the backfield as a run stuffer, but he lacks pass rush juice, 2.5 sacks in 2024. I had him ranked 44th overall in the 6 months defensive tackles in the class, though we watched the interior defensive line get taken before the Lions' first-round pick, and I'm not worried about that value. I'm more concerned that he missed the chances to find Hutchinson's a running mate in the league. Now, look, I can understand actually concerns for Mel Kiper Jr. here in how he just talked about that. He would rather go pass rush at that position than defensive tackle. So before we continue to talk about it, I want you to grade the Detroit Lions draft in the comments right now. A, B, C, D, or F. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's go ahead and get back into it because I understand what he's saying right there. The Lions had an opportunity to get an edge. No doubt about it. And I agree with that assessment, right? There was players there that the Lions could got at edge to really help this team out. And I'm not going to get upset for him saying this. With that said, the Lions opted to go a different route, right? They opted to go in a different way, but Mel Kiper Jr. kept going. He says, and the edge rushers didn't come on day 2 either. The Lions tackled, though. They traded up from 60 to 57 to take guard Tate Ratledge. He's going to fit nicely in Detroit and push to start the right guard Christian Mahogany and Coyote Usika to the main competition. The trade up cost the Lions their 4th-round pick, but they had a hole. Miles Frazier, their 5th-rounder, will also provide depth. He's a top 10 guard and just missed my top 100 overall. The lone edge rusher selected Detroit, Ahmed Hassanein, in round 6. He's productive with 22 sacks, 97 pressures, 33.5 tackles for loss over the past 2 seasons. He's just touching the surface of what he can be, and it's not just splash, it's expecting. Kiper continued talking about the Detroit Lions. He said Detroit's most questioned move, though, was trading up from 102 to 70 and taking receiver Isaac TeSlaa. Good player, but he was ranked number 149 overall on my board. I count 12 receivers ranked above him were available, and 9 of them still have been there in the Lions' original slot. To make an aggressive move up the board, Detroit forked over 2 2026 third-rounders. So he didn't like the trade, really, in my, from what I'm hearing, from what he was saying there. And I get it. The trade was a little bit tough. The trade was rich. To give up 2 third-rounders is a big deal. So TeSlaa is got to really be a quality player because that is a big trade. Look, he talked about ranking and numbers, his overall big board. Remember that, though, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he was 16, ended up being one of the best, Jamar Chase and him in that draft. Not at all saying that TeSlaa is going to be St. Brown, but I'm trying to suggest that it doesn't really matter what other people's ranks, whether Mel Kiper Jr.'s ranks, my ranks, anybody's ranks. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. And he talked about the defensive line and the interior with that pick. When I look at the Detroit Lions interior, I understand why they did it. Totally. And I'm not upset that they decided to go defensive tackle over edge there. Would I like an edge? Yeah, for sure. But defensive tackle was a need. Now look at the defensive tackle depth chart. Much better. Lee McNeil is injured. Remember that. He is not going to be starting. Okay, it's going to be DJ Reader, Levi Onwuzurike, and Tyleik Williams who's going to be starting out this bad boy. But now look at the depth all around by the end of the year. Lee McNeil, DJ Reader, Levi Onwuzurike, Tyleik Williams. My God, that's a good interior depth. Roy Lopez and Makai Wingo coming up there, doing up the best. Broderick Martin, I don't know why it says DT4, but that's Broderick Martin and Miles Adams. Broderick Martin, time's up in Detroit. After this draft, I don't see him making the team. We've talked about that before. Miles Adams, probably not making the team. But the depth at DT is so much better. And you need to have waves of defensive lines. You gotta have it. And we now have it. Question for you folks. Do you agree with Mel Kiper Jr.? A, agree. D, disagree. I think the depth at the defensive line is great. I totally get why the Detroit Lions went that route. And all honesty, Mel Kiper Jr. gave the Detroit Lions a B- grade. And I think it's a little bit better than that. I would definitely go with probably a B+. That's what I thought the grade is. Here's the deal. The Detroit Lions don't draft for what anyone else has. They're going to go with their board, their players. We have been criticized so many times with Brad Holmes drafts, whether it be from the Jahmyr Gibbs draft, from Aiden Hutchinson being a bust, from Penei Sewell to be a bust. We've heard it all. Here is one thing that I know. I don't care what Mel Kiper Jr. or any of the analysts say about the Detroit Lions draft grades. I truly don't care about that. I don't. I think that the Detroit Lions do what the Detroit Lions want to do themselves, and they don't care what we think. So Brad Holmes knows what he's doing in the draft. I would have loved to get an edge earlier. I would have loved that. That would have made my grade much better. With the said, the players that we have, they're going to come in and you got the defensive line, the offensive line, the wide receiver core completely solidified for years, except for edge. But everything else is secured for years. So I thought they did a good job. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the undrafted players that the Detroit Lions did sign, and we're going to feature one. Wide receiver Jackson Meeks received $200,000 guaranteed to make this roster. We'll talk about him in a second. Caden Prixcorn, $60,000 guaranteed. Now, he could fight it out with players such as Shane Zylstra to make that final roster right there. But to be honest, folks, I don't really think anybody else makes the roster. The Lions' depth chart is so freaking good right now. It's going to be quite difficult. But look, you can get some of these players to come out in preseason and may jump somebody else, right? But I think we're going to look at Jackson Meeks more than anyone else because of the salary that he's getting. He's 6'2", 205 from Syracuse, wide receiver. What did he do last year? Well, he had 78 receptions, 7 touchdowns, 1,021 yards, an average of 13.1. I don't think he makes the initial 53-man roster. I don't. The Lions' depth at wide receiver is absolutely amazing. With that said, he can most definitely make the practice squad, right? And go out in preseason and make a name for himself because the Lions gave him a lot of money, so they clearly believe a little bit in him. But it's going to be really, really hard to crack the 53-man roster as an undrafted free agent of any position this year. That's why I didn't go over the players as much as I usually do. Generally speaking, I talk about Jerry Jacobs or I talk about Joseph or whoever. This year, it's a little bit less, but I'll go with Jackson Meeks as potentially the only one having real shot to make the roster. The rest of the tight end, too, I guess, over Shane Zylstra. Other than that, they're going to have to do a lot in preseason to make a real name for themselves. I want to talk a little bit now. I want to get into something here in a second and talk about the rumor mill that's been going around with Jameson Williams. But before we do that, again, I want you to grade the Lions draft A, B, C, D, or F. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Okay, so the rumors around Jameson Williams before the draft, it was reported that Jameson Williams to be traded. All of this reports came out. Now, we found out that it ain't true. Here's what Brad Holmes had to say. He says, no, that's something that we have never entertained. I don't know where the report came from, but that's not a conversation me and Dan Campbell have ever had. Speculation began with Holmes over there. In terms of extension, once again, he's a lot of extension that they're hopefully coming. But it's just one of those we don't know what's going to happen in the financial standpoint because the wide receiver is expensive. It's very expensive. Look, a good problem to have. I want accountability. You know, when as the rumors popped up, I said I just didn't see how the Lions would do something like this. I had to make multiple videos about that because I keep getting hit with questions. And it was irritating. Whoever started the report, I don't know if it was A2C Sports or Mike Payton or who it was. I know the Albert Breer came out like a week after the initial report. But we need to have accountability in something like this because I do believe Brad Holmes never entertained it, and I do believe Dan Campbell never entertained it. Why? It made no sense. Why in the hell would you trade Jameson Williams trying to win a Super Bowl? Why would he talked presser before this presser how he was going to give him the fifth-year option, and then they did. That's unacceptable. That's taken place with that because Jameson Williams gets too much rumors thrown around about him, and I've been doing this for a long time, and there just needs to be a little bit of accountability on something like that. If you're really going to report on it, I would like to see the sources and who was saying that, the legit source that Jameson Williams was going to get traded because, my opinion, there was no, I reached out to people when the rumor came out, and they all thought the same as me. So I'd like to know what's going on there, and maybe we'll figure that out. With that said, folks, adios.